It's an annual tradition on the Fenway Rundown. I'm Chris Cotillo. I am the one person on this panel without a Hall of Fame vote. I'm still paying my proverbial dues, couple more years. We have two
Grow
Hall of
up.
Fame huh?
Grow up.
All
Grow
right.
up.
I have two Hall of Fame voters on the panel today, Sean McAdam, Chris Smith, the other two-thirds of MassLive's Red Sox team. I opened last year's Hall of Fame ballot reveal podcast by saying it was Chris Smith's second time voting and Sean McAdam's 400th. So now to update, it's Chris Smith's third and Sean's 401st. Gentlemen, congratulations on not losing your ballots in the last calendar year. No reason you should have. But today we're going to get into who you voted for and why. And there are discrepancies. Sean, you voted for five people for this year's Hall of Fame ballot. The results will
Correct.
be announced on Tuesday. And Smith, eight, down from 10 from last year. So there are a lot of overlap here. There is a lot of overlap. There are some discrepancies, and then there are some guys that neither of you voted for, and I'm sure there'll be some spirited debate throughout. So I said before we started rolling, 55 minutes last year's pod, way too long. We're going to try to cut this. We're going to try to do a clean 30 to 40. If we can do that, that would be great for me, the host and producer, and the listener as well. So we're going to start with the five overlaps. I'm going to look at the great Hall of Fame tracker that Ryan Thibodeau and his team do and kind of talk about where these guys stand in terms of where they are on the voting totals. We'll go from there. I think there's some no-brainers that obviously you guys can talk about. And we'll start with the first-timers who are, I think, at least one of these guys, a no-doubter. Ichiro is getting 100% of the votes according to Ryan's tracker. And you will add two more to his total. Sean, is this as easy of a case as you've ever seen?
It's right up there. I'll get to the unanimous aspect of this in a minute, but it would defy explanation in my mind for someone to not vote for Ichiro. While he was never a power threat, so we can't say he was a true five-tool player, but an elite outfielder, an elite base stealer, and an elite base hit gatherer with multiple 200 hit seasons. He had an MVP. He was Rookie of the Year. He had countless Gold Gloves. He had a great outfield arm which he used accurately. And let's not forget that he began his major league career at age 27, having already been a standout in his native Japan in the NPB. So if you add all those career hits together, and I know there's the feeling that maybe NPB is not quite at the level of Major League Baseball, I wouldn't argue that, but still probably the second best professional league in the world. And Ichiro was a star there. This is the Baseball Hall of Fame, so by some accounts, you could take into account what he did in Japan, but we're focused here on his major league career. And as I said, other than the lack of homers, that he was basically a faultless player. And I hope he'll be unanimous. I have the feeling he won't be. There may be one, two, or three people who deviate. That's on them. It's not on the body. I'm not responsible for what other people do or vote or don't vote for. I think he should be unanimous. Whether he is or not, at the end of the day, is inconsequential. An all-time great.
So, so Ichiro, I mean, you look at it, 10 Gold Gloves. First 10 years of his career, he was an all-star in each of those seasons. And in 7 of those years, he led the league in hits. And so, yeah, there was not as many doubles and homers and triples as you'd like. And the slugging wasn't there, but I mean, to lead the league in hits 7 of the first 10 years, and to be a all-star all 10 years, and 9 of those years he received MVP votes. As I said, 10-time Gold Glover. So he answers the bell both on the offense and defense. Just one of the more exciting players too to watch. I mean, every time he hit a ball in the infield, you knew there was a chance that it was a single. So it was just a really exciting guy to watch because of that speed. So yeah, I mean, it was pretty much a no-brainer for me.
The other guy, and that's one of your, obviously overlaps. The other guy who's a first ballot guy who's trending really, really well on the Hall of Fame tracker, CC Sabathia, getting 93.3% of the votes that are out there. And he is somebody that both of you voted for as well. We'll start with Sean here again because Sean, in conversation yesterday, during a meeting, you were talking about Sabathia and how, he probably will make it, and you did vote for him. But for you, it was not as easy of a case as maybe for some others.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to ever say that I contemplated excluding him, but to me, he is not the slam dunk that Ichiro is. He would be elected with, I think, the second highest ERA of any starter in the modern era, going back to, I think, Jack Morris currently holds that record, and CC would be the second highest career ERA. I thought he had a great career. I don't put him in the class of you don't even have to think about. To me, he is not in the, Palmer, Marichal, Maddox, Pedro, Johnson, Clemens class, Seaver, people like that in the modern era that you don't even stop for 1 second to contemplate. Some of the things he comes up short, frankly. Cy Young voting, not as accomplished as some others in their careers. Toward the back end of his career, he was a compiler, frankly. And I also don't subscribe to the notion that, well, we're running out of starting pitchers to put in the Hall of Fame. So anybody close, we got to put in. No, there's no obligation to fulfill a positional quota in my mind. You are either an all-time great, as I believe Sabathia is, or you're not. The fact that we don't have enough starting pitchers, whatever that means, should not come into play here. But I did, without reservation, vote for Sabathia.
So yeah, some of those compiling stats that Sean talks about, the more dominance obviously came in his 20s. I think his ERA through, age 30 season was a 3.5, and I think he's 5 times he got Cy Young votes, and he did win that one Cy Young. But compiling stats is a thing in baseball, right? Like, it's important to get 3,000 hits. And he was a guy that got 3,000 strikeouts. And there's not, I think he's 18th all time in strikeouts. And if you look at all the people that have had over 3,000 strikeouts, everybody's in the Hall of Fame except for Curt Schilling, who probably should be in the Hall of Fame, but told voters not to vote for him the final year, or he would probably have gotten in, and Verlander and Scherzer. And they're obviously going to be first ballot Hall of Famers. And so,
Did Clemens have 3,000 or no? I mean, yeah, right.
oh yes, I'm sorry, that's the other one is Clemens. I think Clemens is
Yeah,
second.
4,600. I was going to say, where are you missing him?
Yeah. Yes. So I mean, you could make a strong case that Clemens deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. So, I mean, there's 4 guys that haven't, and 2 of them are going to be first ballot Hall of Famers, and the other one, Curt Schilling and Clemens. And so, I mean, compiling stats, yes. I looked at him as, he actually does have a very close career as Andy Pettitte, who, that's a guy that a lot of people debate on. And they're Andy Pettitte doesn't have the Cy Young Award. He doesn't have the 3,000 strikeouts. Very close ERA though. I mean, like, look at Sabathia's there is like 3.7, and Pettitte's is 3.8. Pettitte probably had a little bit more success in the postseason too. So
there's also
Pettitte,
the HGH question.
Yeah. So, but I don't, as I voted for A-Rod and
teasers.
Dan.
Teasers.
So, I'm not going to, put that, in not in his favor, but, you look at him and he's somebody that I will consider in future years, but I just couldn't get past it this year. And so I think that, as I said, he's similar to Sabathia. And so as Sean said, Sabathia shouldn't be a slam dunk Hall of Famer, and he's what's he trending at? Good tell.
93.
I mean, I would have thought like he'd be the first if he's a first ballot Hall of Famer, he'd be like 80% or
Well, that'll
something.
come down, I'm sure.
I agree, Chris. I did not expect, and we should point out that the tracker tends to inflate, not through any means of deception, but people who give their ballots to the tracker tend to, present company excluded here, be younger and have different voting methods. And usually the tracker is about 5 or 10% above what the ultimate total is. So I don't think Sabathia is going to end up with more than 90%, but I'm surprised he is as high as he is right now.
Yep.
And just to kind of buffet my point about the compiling and kind of the last third of his career, over his last 7 seasons, and that began when he was 32, so not 36 or 37. His last 7 seasons, he was, and remember, he pitched for a good team, a good franchise that was competitive, the Yankees. 2013 to 2019, 7 final seasons, 60 and 59 with a 4.33. So he was fairly mediocre for the last third of his career.
He was Nick Pivetta with for the last third of his career.
Yep.
Put it in perspective that way. So that's 2 guys that you have both first ballot guys. We'll head to kind of the returners now, where you do have some overlap. And on his third ballot, trending as of now to get in at 80.4% on the tracker, but it's going to be close based on the parameters Sean just outlined. Carlos Beltran is a yes for both of you. We'll start with Smith on why.
Yeah, I mean, he's 25th all time in extra base hits. He has more extra. I mean, he's tied with Cal Ripken Jr. And he's ahead of guys like Reggie Jackson, Chipper Jones, Andre Dawson. He's 29th all time in doubles, 47th all time in homers. He was extremely good. He was an extremely good defender too. He was a 9-time All-Star and 3-time Gold Glover. So, I mean, I can see why he didn't make it on his first time on the ballot last year.
This is his third time.
Is it the third time?
Mm-hmm.
You also have to add the 312 stolen bases. Obviously, had some leg issues that but he was a fast guy when he first came up, and a 5-tool talent player for the Royals. And so I look at him and he's kind of a no-brainer to me just because of where he stacks up in terms of these numbers like extra base hits and home runs and all that, in terms of other great players. As I said, he's ahead of Chipper Jones, Andre Dawson, Craig Biggio, Ernie Banks, all in extra base hits. And so I voted for him the last 2 years, and I'll vote for him again this year.
And Sean, you've also gone 3 for 3 with him, right?
Yeah. I know that some people, I don't know how many, but some withheld their vote the first time because of Beltran's involvement with the 2017 sign stealing with the Astros. He was, as testimony later showed, one of the architects and ringleaders behind that, not simply someone who went along, but helped design it. And some in protest did not vote for him his first year. Chris, do you have vote totals and how much he jumped from 1 to 2?
Yeah, I'm just looking at this now. In 2022, he was, or I guess it would be 2023, right? So the first year. He was at 46.5, so well short. And then last year got all the way up to 57.1. So it's not
a jump of more than
jump,
10%.
but a legitimate one.
Right, a jump of more than 10% in his second year. So that lines up with my theory that some people in protest did not vote for him who might otherwise have been inclined to do so, to, quote, punish him or to register their disapproval for his involvement. It's one of those things. I don't think we know the full story. I did not take that into account. Certainly, it's a blemish on his career, but I don't think it is disqualifying. As Chris Smith said, he was a terrific all-around player with power, speed, and defense. I think he had 100 RBI 7 or 8 times, always in the 20s and 30s when it came to home runs, an elite base stealer, particularly in the first half of his career, and an awesome center fielder, a great defender. And I should add that while I do not punish people or do not have my support withheld because people don't fare well in the postseason, I do use it as a positive to push a candidate over the fence when they do well. Kurt Schilling, to me, is one of those people. And Beltran is another with a career OPS in 65 postseason games of 102.1. That is fabulous. I mean, if you have an 850 OPS in regular season or postseason, that's outstanding. To be over 1,000 in 15 different series covering 65 games, it tells you how much he rose to the occasion in October. People remember him for taking that called third strike against Adam Wainwright while with the Mets. That's kind of a blemish for some Mets fans. But to me, not much debate here. Carlos Beltran is a deserving Hall of Famer.
So that's 3 that you both have. We'll go to the 4th. Red Sox legend, not really, but he did pitch for the team, Billy Wagner. Billy Wagner currently trending at 84.7%, a little bit higher. It is his 10th and final year on the ballot, which sometimes can work in the favor of the players. You both have him. Sean, I forget I know we talked about it last year, but have you always been a Wagner voter? And what
I don't think I
was
the first few years.
Mm-hmm.
I have been for at least the last 4 or 5. I may not have voted for him in the beginning. A couple of things put me in the yes category. He has the lowest ERA in the modern era for pitchers with whatever the measuring stick is, 600 or 700 innings pitched in his career. And he also has the lowest batting average against for a left-hander in modern history. And of course, the save numbers over his career. I just spoke of players who have not fared well in the postseason. Billy Wagner is one of those. To me, it isn't enough to detract from his candidacy. There were definitely some hiccups for him in October, but I thought he was a dominant elite closer. I'm careful sometimes with my votes for closers because I think we see inflated save totals and with some guys. And I think if you look a little closer, there's some question about their credentials. I don't think those exist for Wagner. To me, that modern ERA and the lowest batting average against are 2 indicators of how dominant he was in his career at his peak. So I happily voted for him again.
And Smith, you've had him all 3 times, right?
Yeah, I mean, what Sean said about the ERA, I mean, 2.31 ERA. I mean, if you look at some of the comparable closers, Trevor Hoffman was 2.87, Lee Smith 3.03. So, Raleigh Fingers 2.90. So his ERA was, was pretty incredible. He threw fewer innings than all those guys, but he still compiled 903 innings. And his WAR with all 3 of those guys is right there. And so the other stat I look at with him, Sean mentioned batting average against and ERA. The other one is just whip. I mean, he just didn't allow any hits or walks. And so
sub 1 for his career.
Yes. And that's remarkable. I mean, you look at, that's just incredible. And so, just a closer. I mean, we've seen so many closers with the Red Sox and, like a Craig Kimbrell type, walking the house, and we'll see it with Aroldis Chapman. Those guys are extremely talented. they have trouble throwing strikes. This guy was a guy that just didn't, it's like, I'm not comparing it to, but you remember in 2013 with Koji Uriara, he didn't fool around, with his saves. He 1, 2, 3, the game was over. And he also has the highest strikeout rate of any of those guys. All three of those other guys that are in the Hall of Fame, I think his strikeout rate was 11.9 or 12 and
11-9.
yeah. And so, a guy that I mean, his saves weren't there, but as Sean said, you can sometimes compile, right? Like, sometimes save numbers are overflated, and that gets you in. So, yeah, I mean, look at he's, I think that he deserves to be in.
So he's at 84.7 in his last year, and Beltran is at 80.4. Sean, what are your expectations on yes or no on those guys come Tuesday?
I think Wagner gets in. What did he miss by last year? I think 6 or 7 votes. It was single digits. I know that
73.8 was the total.
Right, but what did that translate into raw? How many additional votes he
5.
would have needed? Yeah,
5.
Okay. I find it incomprehensible that somebody could be that close in his final year of eligibility and doesn't get over the hump. We've seen guys take bigger strides than that in their final year. I would expect Wagner gets in. I think Beltran might have to wait a year or two. Just a prediction.
I don't think anybody's been that close, the year before and not gotten in.
Right.
We'll go now to the final overlap between you guys. We'll start with Smith because this is Sean McAdam's favorite player of all time. Abreu Jones is a guy who has been on the ballot, steadily trending up. Last year, got to 61.6. This year, he is trending, according to the tracker, that's Adam Jones. That's not him. Where is he? 73%. So he's a tick below. This is his 8th year, not his 7th. Last year was his 7th. But he gets votes from both Sean McAdam and Chris Smith. We'll start with Smitty on why you have him again.
Yeah, I'm with Sean in this. Like, it's just surprising that he's gone on so many. What time is it? What number of ballot is this?
This is 8.
Like 8 ballots. A guy that's has 10 Gold Gloves in center field, one of the most important positions. You're talking about straight up the middle. 10 Gold Gloves in center field ties Ken Griffey Jr. for the second most Gold Gloves of the position, behind only Willie Mays. So you're not only, I mean, you've got guys in there like Ozzie Smith, who were great defenders and not as productive hitters. However, I mean, you look at and as I said with defense, Jones also is 22nd all time in defensive WAR. But as I said, like you look at those guys and they're there because of defense, and you look at a guy like Abreu Jones, and he also produced with a bat. I mean, 48th all time in homers, 434 home runs. He finished with almost 400 doubles. So, you look at that and, about 2,000 hits. And so, I can't see why he's gone that long without, getting over the top.
Yeah, I to answer your question, Chris, I think the issue people had was after 31, he went off a cliff and became really a sub-average player for whatever reason. There were allegations that he got out of shape in his early 30s when he was playing for the Dodgers and later the Yankees, was nowhere near the defender he once was. But my minimum for excellence is a 10-year stretch, and he certainly had that. And my go-to stat for Abreu Jones, if someone were to say, explain in one sentence why you vote for Abreu Jones or any player, my answer is this. In the history of Major League Baseball, 4 players have hit 400 or more home runs and won 10 Gold Gloves. They are Willie Mays, Ken Griffey Jr., Mike Schmidt, and Abreu Jones. If you're in that class as a power hitter and a defender, you are an all-time great. I realize his 30s were a big drop-off. If he had even average seasons in his 30s and gotten to 500 homers, we probably would have been talking about already Abreu Jones being in Cooperstown. He's only got 3 seasons left. It does not look like he's going to clear that hurdle this year. I hope he does in the next 2. I have been steadfast in my support, as Chris noted at the beginning of this. And to me, he's unquestionably a Hall of Famer.
That's the 5 overlaps once again. The 2 newcomers in Ichiro and CC Sabathia, and the 3 returners, Billy Wagner, Andrew Jones, and Carlos Beltran. That is where Sean's ballot ends. And so Sean doesn't, I don't think you've ever voted for the full 10 or come close. 5 is right about where you usually end up. And so that is where you are this
usually.
year. Smitty had a longer ballot. You went to 10 last year. You got to 8 this year. And so we'll talk about the 3 that you have that Sean does not now. And we'll loop the first 2 in. And we had this exact same discussion a year ago. We'll have this exact same discussion next year. Alex Rodriguez and Manny Ramirez are Hall of Famers in the eyes of Chris Smith, but not Sean McAdam. So they pick up 1 vote of MassLive's 2. Smith, take it away.
Yeah, and I can completely understand with Sean's case. I mean, they were repeat offenders of steroids, and so, there were some people that just got caught once and that's it, but they were repeat, steroid offenders. But I have just decided to include all the steroid guys no matter what. And I don't need to say any of A-Rod and, Manny stats, that they're at the top of the list in, tons of categories, and that if you look at the game, they were 2 of the best hitters of their generation. And so, I can understand why Sean and anybody wouldn't vote for them, and I actually get that. And what was Manny, like 3 times, maybe a couple times,
At least 2, yeah.
and so yeah, and I can understand that, but I just felt like, with those guys, they're 2 of the greatest players of all time, and they deserve to be in the Hall of Fame with guys like Roger Clemens and Barry Bonds, who you can't really tell the story of baseball without those guys in it.
And Sean, you've gone over this before, but you have a very specific line that you draw when it comes to these guys.
Yeah, and not to make this a love fest, but I too completely respect Chris's philosophy here, and others who vote for players like Manny and A-Rod. I have voted for others who have pretty obviously been PED abusers. I voted for both Bonds and Clemens for most of their eligibility, not at the beginning, and then I kind of came around and said that because their transgressions happened before specific penalties were put in place, that it wasn't my job to play policeman for Major League Baseball or the Hall of Fame, and that obviously was 7 Cy Youngs for Clemens and 7 MVPs for Bonds. There was no debating their worthiness from a numbers standpoint, so I did vote for both. The line I draw here that Chris referenced is that both were caught multiple times after baseball put specific discipline and penalties in. They seemingly didn't care. No one is arguing that their numbers reflect greatness. I just think they're too compromised and frankly too arrogant because of their PED use to continue long after it had been outlawed, long after testing had been implemented. And I can't in good conscience check off those names, but I understand others like Chris who say, hey, they're on the ballot, they're eligible, their numbers say they're all-time greats. I'm voting for them. Completely get that, but that's where I get off the train.
In a case for steroid guys, in general, there are obviously Hall of Famers that didn't get caught that are in the Hall of Fame. I can't play like, let's guess if this guy did it. Let's guess if this guy didn't do it. There are Hall of Famers that have used steroids, and so but also there was a point where there were rules that were put in place, and so I totally get that. But are there guys that got caught and did it again but didn't get caught again that are in the Hall of Fame? I understand though completely, and so I'm just gonna go with them. Maybe my mind changes in the next year. Because Sean presents a really good argument in that one, so maybe my mind changes on that. But for right now, I'm a yes on them.
Yeah, and I think we're splitting 1 and 1 here. I mean, this is like these guys are not going to get in, I don't think. I mean,
Yeah.
Manny's on his 8th year. He was at 32.5 last year. A-Rod, Manny's on his 9th year. I'm looking at the tracker from last year. Manny's on his ninth, second to last. And this is the type of thing where like people don't change their mind over time, right? So Manny's at 32.5 last year, and he's tracking at 36.2 right now. In the case of Alex Rodriguez, who's on his 4th year, 34.8 last year. He's trending at 40.5 right now.
I've said this before. I'd like someone to explain why you vote for one and not the other, because I
Right.
don't get that.
Well,
one.
because A-Rod
Like,
was
to me,
much better, I guess. I don't know.
Pardon me?
Because A-Rod was like better. I don't know.
But it isn't a matter of better. Could you
I know,
look
but
at
that's
Manny's?
I guess the explanation.
I don't understand it. Frankly, to me, they're either both in or they're both out. Splitting your vote there makes absolutely no sense, because from a numbers perspective, we may be talking about the two greatest right-handed hitters of the last 40 years. I mean, you can throw Pujols in there, maybe one or two others, but we are talking about two of the best 3 or 4 right-handed hitters over the last 40, maybe 50 years. The numbers are off the charts. There's no debating their statistical worthiness. So how you vote for one and not the other is beyond me, but that's for another time.
We'll now get to the final guy on Smith's ballot of 8. And this is a guy who is not going to get in this year on a 6th chance, but Chris Smith is one of the 25.2% that loves him and thinks he should get in. Same thing last year. We talked about it, but Bobby Abreu gets Chris Smith's vote.
Yeah, so I think that Bobby, I actually sent to my college friends, we have a group text, and I sent my Hall of Fame ballot before I mailed it in, like a photo of it, and one of the first replies was, Bobby Abreu, boring. And a boring player. And I think that he was overlooked a lot during his career. I mean, he only made one All-Star game, which is crazy. One thing that I try to do when I vote for these is read as many articles of guys that I'm on the offense about as possible. Like, I've read articles about Andy Pennant because I did seriously consider giving him a vote. Um, I've read articles on Carlos Beltran and other people's cases, especially Carlos Beltran's first year. And so, I have read articles about Abreu, and one of the first ones that I read was, if you think that Ichiro is a Hall of Famer, then you should also vote for Abreu. Now, I know Ichiro was a 10-time Gold Glove winner, or whatever I said. Um, and Abreu only won one Gold Glove. And so obviously you have to look at Ichiro and say he's the superior defender. But if you look at their careers hitting wise, they played pretty much the same extent. I mean, Abreu played 228 fewer games, but he had 346 more extra base hits. He had 921 extra base hits total. Ichiro had 575. So, I mean, you look at this. I mean, when you look at his stats, his stats are like, as my friend said, boring player. And you would be surprised if you looked at some of his stats and, you see 400 steals. That's 100 fewer than Ichiro, but I mean, that's a lot of stolen bases. And, Abreu's OP on base percentage 40 points higher than Ichiro's, 73 points higher in slugging percentage, and 113 points higher in OPS. And they played pretty much the same exact, extents of the, lengths of career and stuff like that. I can understand why somebody wouldn't put him in. And, as we said, why am I comparing, Ichiro, who's a surefire, no brainer, should be 100% guy, to a guy that, what percentage did he have last year?
Yeah, 14.8.
I think it's just because, like he only made one All-Star game, and I think he was a little underrated at his time. And when you look at some of the advanced stats now, you're like, this hitter, this player would have been much more appreciated in today's game. So, I can understand why people wouldn't vote for him. but I'm going to give him my vote again.
Sean, is this a guy you've ever considered?
I'm sorry.
Is this a guy you've ever considered?
Yeah, I mean, I thought about it, and frankly, as Chris said, his support and the support of others made me go look at him again. And, I'll have to say that I did not know that this is someone who ended his career with a on-base percentage very close to 400, which is remarkable. He ended his 18-year career with a 395 on-base percentage and an 870 OPS. Those are not numbers to be trifled with. Not, a great home run hitter with 288, but a ton of doubles at 574, 400 stolen bases, and a good, if not great, outfield defender. As Chris said, just one Gold Glove. But I also, on the Baseball Reference page, look at similar careers, and here's who Bobby Abreu gets matched up with. Luis Gonzalez with the Diamondbacks, Bernie Williams, Dwight Evans, Garrett Anderson, and Torrey Hunter. All excellent players, all to me just shy of Cooperstown worthy. A very, very good career, to me, not an all-timer.
So that is Chris Smith. Go ahead, Smith.
Well, I mean, like, you look at the 870 OPS, and it's like one thing, that was the reply that I wrote to one of my college friends in that text, like, a boring player. And then I started tweeting, then I started texting some stats, and one of them was like, an 870 OPS.
Yeah, I think that would surprise a lot of people.
You say Bobby Abreu, you would not think that. And so that's why I say he was kind of he flew under the radar a little bit.
No question.
Talent. But I agree with you and it's important to compare players. And, and so right now, I mean, I was on the fence about him. So it's not like I'm saying that he should be in the Hall of Fame. I'm just saying that if 75% of people agree with me, then he's a Hall of Famer, and I can see why he wouldn't be. But
if you look at the WAR stat that people love to look at, he had 60.2. Joe Mauer 55.2, Todd Helton 61.8. Those guys got in last year in that range. I know different positions and things, but
yeah, when you talk about B-WAR, the Baseball Reference WAR, he had, as you said, he had a 60.2, and I think Ichiro was 60. And so, like, I'm not comparing him to Ichiro. Ichiro was a better player, and he's a first, he should be 100% first ballot. But I'm just trying to look at some stats and say, was he underappreciated for his time?
Yeah, interesting. So that's Chris Smith's ballot of 8. The 5 overlaps with Sean: Ichiro, Sabathia, Wagner, Andrew Jones, and Beltran, and then adding A-Rod, Manny, and Bobby Abreu to the mix. Now we'll get to the guys you didn't vote for, and this will be a hot button issue among Red Sox fans. Dustin Pedroia is on the ballot for the first year. You each covered him. Sean for his entire career. Smith for most of it, or I guess the end of it. Me for like 4 games because I was there in 18 and 19 when he tried to come back and couldn't. And so we'll start with Sean on this. Sean, you literally probably saw more Dustin Pedroia played games than 99.9% of people in the world. And, I think everybody knows what's going on here. The peak was great. The talent was there. Injuries got him, and he's tracking at 14.1%. He's not going to make it, obviously, this year. It's really more of a matter if he'll go over that 5% to stay. Looks like he will. What was your thought process on Pedroia? Was it a legitimate consideration? And just kind of explain it all.
Yeah, I never really got to being close to voting for him. My initial instinct, one of the things I dislike now about our industry and just sports media in general is like the minute someone retires, people are like, Hall of Famer? Yes or no? Right now, tell me. And that's not the time to make that decision. You have to, study this, put it in context, give it some thought. But my initial thought when people asked me that question was, no, I don't think so. And in the end, that didn't change. However, I am glad that it looks like he's going to clear the 5% threshold. That means he's going to remain on the ballot because I'm not ruling out changing my mind. And I know that bothers people. Oh, did he get any more hits today? Did he become a better player today, 5 years after he retired? No, of course not. But context changes, new information arrives, new ways of judging and evaluating players up against their contemporaries arrive. So we're open to change, and I have accounted for some of my changes that I've made in my voting history. The argument for Dustin Pedroia is that for just about 10 years, he was one of the best players in the game. The question you have to ask yourself is that a long enough period of domination? And right now, I'm not there yet. I believe he was for a 10-year period from 07 through 2017. I think he was fourth or fifth in WAR in baseball in that time. He did everything. He did a lot of. There are a lot of intangibles there in terms of leadership, toughness, competitiveness. There's no question he was one of the better middle infielders and second baseman of his time. To me, as I said, in my mind, right now, the period of dominance was not quite long enough. I may revisit that in the future. I hope he's eligible for me to do so.
Smith?
Yeah, I think the same thing. I hope he's eligible, he gets past that 5% so I can reevaluate it in the future. You look at like a Jaron Duran type this year, which had a Hall of Fame, like last year, he had a Hall of Fame season. And somebody tweeted this, I forget who it was. They were like, it's a Hall of Fame season. Now he's got to string, 10 more of those together. You look at like a Pedroia guy. You look at Pedroia, and he had Hall of Fame seasons. He had very good seasons.
An MVP?
An MVP, a Rookie of the Year. It just wasn't enough in my book. I mean, you look at him, if you were to put him on the ballot, you'd have to put Chase Utley on the ballot.
Very
And
similar.
I just can't get to Chase Utley right now.
Yep.
And
Same.
so, how many, we talk about longevity and things like that. Well, it's not his fault that, he got injured and, his knee issues derailed his career, but it happened and he finished with, fewer than 2,000 hits. And, so you look at some guys that, like Sean Green reached 2,000 hits, like when you look at the guys that are just under 2,000 hits, like Jeff Conine, Melky Cabrera, Fred Lynn. And if Fred Lynn had played longer, right? Like,
Yep.
he would have been a Hall of Famer. So like, I just feel like, he just doesn't get there in terms of it. He's very close to like when you look at Chase Utley, and I'm not putting Chase Utley in, and Chase Utley's had, 10 points or 12 points higher WAR than Pedroia. And Chase Utley is somebody that I've considered the last couple of years. And so, so I feel like, if he had played more seasons like Chase Utley, then he would have had a better peaks and stuff like that. And I would have, considered him more. And maybe I will reconsider him down the road. As Sean said, you're not going to accumulate more RBIs and doubles and home runs and hits, but you also see things differently, like, than you did, 10 years ago, 5 years ago. There's more advanced stats. There's more things to look at and compare with players. And there's more context as you go, you get, people were winning Cy Youngs so many years ago. If they got to 20 wins, that was a huge thing. Now people don't look at 20 wins as important as what's your ERA and what's your whip and what's your, strikeout to walk ratio and things like that, or expected batting average against, so there's different things that we look at, and we're going to evolve in the way we see stats and compare stats. So maybe I will vote for him in the future, but right now I just can't see it.
Sean, would you be afraid to tell him this in person?
No, I wouldn't, but I think it would be an interesting conversation.
Maybe one for Fort Myers.
I'd be happy. I'd be happy, and I should be willing to make that case to a player's face if it were to come up. And I would say to Pedroia what I said, that I did not vote for him this year, that I'm not ruling out voting for him in the future, and I hope he remains on the ballot for me and others to continue to consider him.
Again, not really close right now at 14.1. Did have some support among some Boston writers, but not these two, leaving Dustin Pedroia off the ballot. So we're going to just talk briefly now. You touched on one of them, or Smith, you've touched on two of them. Guys who are in the mix, who are, on the ballot that are not trending to be involved. Neither of you voted for them. Case Utley's one. Andy Pettit is another one. Chris, you said you considered both of them a bit. Sean, I don't know where you are on those. We'll start with Chris just briefly. Did you come close on either of them?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at Pennett's overall body of work, it's very similar to CC Sabathia. He actually, I mean, he was, I think, a 3.8 ERA, and he pitched like a ton of postseason games. I think he won 6 championships, right? Like, 6 World Series. And so, he was a guy that was a great pitcher in a great pitcher who was on a great team. Um, I look at the ERA and overall all the stats, and just didn't meet some benchmarks that that I got for Sabathia, like, certain things like strikeouts. And so he's definitely somebody that I'm going to consider in the future. In terms of Chase Utley, he just doesn't get there for me.
And this is Pettit. First of all, Pettit's 7th year, Utley's second.
Utley's second.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I don't have any, like, my argument against Utley in front of me. So I'm just going to look at some things, though. Like, basically he was a very good player. He wasn't he was not a great Hall of Fame type player. You look at his average: 275, on base percentage 358, slugging percentage 465. There was a time right there in between 2005 and 2010 that he was one of the best players in baseball. He won 4 Silver Sluggers. During that time, he got MVP votes in all those seasons. He was an all-star in 5 of those seasons. But as I just said, Pedroia also had an extremely dominant stretch of, 5 years. Other than that, he compiled some, and was a really good defender, and was a good player. But besides those 5 years, he was a good player. I don't look at him as over a long enough term as being a great player.
And he, with a massive, jump projected wise right now from last year, trending in his first year at 28.8%, all the way up already to 54.6. That suggests that this is a guy who I think probably will get in at some point, Sean.
Yeah, when you're doubling your total on your second year and clearing the 50% mark in your second year, you're certainly heading that way. I would echo some of the thoughts that Chris had about Utley, a very, very good player, and someone I will continue to consider. Haven't pulled the trigger yet, might sometime in the future.
So the ballot on 2025 has the projections from Ryan and his team have Ichiro, Sabathia, Wagner, and Beltran in. And Andrew Jones just short, Utley at 55, and then, A-Rod, Manny, Pettit, some of the guys we talked about. Want to end with this. Anybody else that you considered? Felix Hernandez is tracking at about 26%. Jimmy Rollins at 19. Mark Burley at 13. Omar Vizquel 12. David Wright 11. And then just guys who have gotten votes, even though I don't think anybody thinks they should have. K-Rod, Russell Martin, Brian McCann, Ian Kinsler, who we all covered, Torrey Hunter. And then to finish off the ballot with the zeros, Ben Zobrist, Troy Tulowitzki, Red Sox legend, Hanley Ramirez, Fernando Rodney, Adam Jones, Curtis Granderson, and Carlos Gonzalez. I think if there's anybody on this list that jumps out to me as someone worth considering, it's Felix Hernandez. Sean, is there anybody that you gave a second thought to, Felix or otherwise, of the guys I just mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, I looked at Felix. He was a dominant elite pitcher for a time, but again, in my mind, not for long enough. He was for a period of probably, I want to say, without looking at it too carefully right now in this context, he had 5, 6, 7 great years, but to me, it's got to be longer to warrant enshrinement in Cooperstown. So while I looked there, I was not tempted really to vote for Felix.
And no one else after him. Rollins, Burley,
Nope.
Visco, right?
No,
David Wright.
Burley was every year, 30 starts, 14 or 15 wins, mid to high threes ERA, a very consistent guy, had a perfect game, had a no-hitter, pitch quick games. That's always a good thing, but not a Hall of Famer.
And where do you square David Wright?
Wright is actually kind of the New York version of Pedroia. Seemingly headed to the Hall of Fame in his 20s, but extremely limited in his 30s by back injuries, which really robbed him in much the same way that the knee injury. I'm sure if we saw Wright play every day in New York the way that some of us saw Pedroia play every day in Boston, that support would be greater, and we'd be talking about him possibly being unfairly passed over. Again, in my mind, not a long enough period of dominance.
And Smitty on Felix and the crew here.
Yeah, Felix is really the only one I consider of those. I mean, Burley is, what Sean said, but with Felix, you look at him, and I really did consider him. Um, and I was fortunate enough in his final really good season, was 2015, and I was able to cover a game in Seattle and see him pitch there. And there was excitement like you would get with Pedro Martinez in Boston there. I mean, there was a whole section of I forget, but there was a whole
The
section
king, wasn't it the king in his
King's
court?
Court.
King's Court, I
Yeah,
think,
something
right?
like that. And it was fun to watch him. It was like in his prime. It was
Yeah,
like
his starts were events.
yes. However, if you look past his age, when he turned at 30 and beyond, he only pitched 467 innings. That's 84 starts after he turned 30. And, he had a 4.89 ERA during that stretch. He needed to compile more, good seasons after that. He did not. I read in one article that I read on him, on whether he should make the Hall of Fame or not. I guess he was quoted as saying he went into camp with Baltimore. I think it was in
2020, right?
2000. What's that?
Maybe 2020 he was with
Yeah, actually, I
Baltimore.
think it was 2020. And
Yeah.
a reporter asked him, why are you still doing this? And he said, I need to compile some more stats to get in the Hall of Fame. That was his quote. And so it's like he doesn't believe he's a Hall of Famer. He didn't pitch after that, right? Like he didn't
Yeah,
compile those
he ended
stats.
up with the Braves, and then opted out of the season, never to be seen or heard from again.
Yeah, so he felt like he needed to do more in his career at that point to make the Hall of Fame. And if he had, he would have probably, but he just didn't do enough after his age 29 season. As I said, I mean, when you look at that under 100 starts, 100 starts after you turn 30 and,
Right.
4.89 ERA, he just fell off completely because of injuries and stuff after that age 29 season. It's too bad because he was, electric. And I did not cover the Red Sox at this time, or Sean would know this better, but wasn't somebody that Theo coveted, that he
Yeah,
wanted?
they'd made a super big blockbuster trade proposal for Felix, and for a time they thought they were going to get him, and it fell through.
Well, he's not going to Cooperstown this year, or probably ever, based on the numbers. Guys, thank you for your explanations. I think, there's so much in the way of arguments on, Twitter, X, whatever, these days about these types of things. People get really, up in arms about them. But when you hear, as someone who's going to go through this process in a couple of years, I think the research and the reasoning that goes into it, and the deep dives, and two people, do it differently, but obviously put a lot of work into it. I think it's a worthwhile pod to do. A long one, but we appreciate everybody listening. Both Sean and Chris will have, or already have when this rolls, their explanations up in written form on the site. We'll be back next week on the pod.